Good afternoon and welcome to Questback's webinar for Unlocking Insights Across the Employee Journey with myself, Luke Talbot,
and I'm Richard Young, also from Questback.
Fantastic. Today we've got quite an exciting agenda for you. We're going to have a look at how to unlock insights across the employee journey. So we see that in hyper-competitive markets, there's a real need to attract, retain, and develop the right people, and we've put together a solution which we brought to market this year, which we hope that you'll enjoy looking at, and we'll go through it in a moment. So the agenda for today, we're going to cover a why employee touchpoint. So what is the need for it, and where does it come from? And then Richard is going to go through a live demonstration of the solution. We're also fully open to questions from the audience. If at any time you do have a question, then please do put it into the GoToWebinar interface. On your right-hand side in the toolbar, you should see a button that allows you to ask a question. We'll pick up, if questions are relevant at the time, we'll pick them up and maybe take them in the flow of the webinar. And at the end, we'll make some time for questions as well. So please do keep the questions flowing, and we'll make this as interactive as possible. Okay, so when we were looking to put together the employee touchpoint solution, we asked ourselves, the obvious question: how do you solve the following business issues? The thing is, we've got lots of customers with sorry. So we often get asked the same sorts of questions by some of our customers. We've put together some cases here which we're about to go through. And so Richard, if you'd like to put the next slide up, please.
Sure. So I think probably this is a good example of one of the cases that we've had coming through to us. So it's one of 3 or 4 that we're going to run through for you of real examples from some of our customer base who came to us and said that their standard mechanisms aren't in place to help with this sort of issue. So this is a major European bank, and every single year they've got quite a significant graduate intake that come in, and they were finding, just purely from HR system details and information from there, that over 80% of those graduates had left within 1 year. Absolutely phenomenal percentage. And of course, this is a massive cost to the business because the amount of time just to recruit those people, to onboard them, the percentage of lost productivity, the fact that they're probably being relied upon within various departments around the business. So they knew the figures, obviously, but they just didn't know why. So to them, it was really important. How can you solve this sort of issue with a normal engagement approach? So moving on. So the next case we're going to look at, this is a global contact center where they have over 20,000 staff. So it's a fairly large operation globally. And one of the biggest issues there is the average tenure of an employee in a contact center isn't actually that long. It tends to be, some people will leave well within the year, some people will leave just after, but the average tenure tends to work out at about 15 months. And they knew, simply by looking at the data, looking at the cost of hiring, the cost of onboarding, etc., that simply by increasing that by 1 month, if there was a way, would save the organisation about £2 million a year. The issue is that there was no real source of data to help them understand how they could try to increase that tenure by anything, if at all. And one of the big issues is that the traditional feedback methods for employees, if you think about the annual employee survey, for instance, with a tenure of an average of 15 months, you're either going to hit the point where the annual survey arrives when you're at the beginning of your employment and you're all fired up and massively happy, or at the end when you're just about to leave anyway. In any case, it's probably completely disconnected from the kind of work that you do as an employee. So the problem there is the traditional method of getting feedback from your employees really doesn't help you get to the bottom of why employees tend to leave after such a short period of time. So extending it can be pretty hard. Absolutely. So another example, and again slightly different, in that
a lot of our business is from retailers as well. So one of those is a clicks and mortar retailer. So they've got the online presence as well as the shops. And they came to us saying that quite a significant number of staff, they come into the business, there's obviously a decent onboarding process, they're bought into the brand and what they're doing and all the rest of it. But there seems to be a real cut-off after 2 years. And when I say that, that's 50 to 60% of their staff leave after 2 years. So it's a real chunk of people that are going, and obviously they want to hang on to valuable members of staff and not incur that the ongoing issues with recruitment costs and that side. But also, it has quite a big impact on the business when you're constantly churning people over every couple of years like that. The thing is, they know that it's not fundamentally broken because an awful lot of other people, once they've stayed those 2 years and they've got over that hump, if you like, they're into they typically stay for quite some time. So, 5 years plus is quite normal there. So there isn't an obvious reason what it is. So again, a more standard approach isn't necessarily going to get to the heart of this sort of information.
Okay, so for this final case, we're looking at a leading NHS trust, and if ever there was a type of organisation that had a massive stake in trying to maintain and nurture its talent, then I can't think of any greater than healthcare. And so when we put up a slide about NHS trusts, we thought we'd give you an image of people running over the Brooklyn Bridge. So yeah, just to keep it in the UK. The issue with this situation was that they had a lot of staff leaving the organisation, which meant they had to spend a lot on agency nurses and agency staff. I mean, the real critical thing here is that of the people leaving, a massive proportion, we're talking nearly 85% of those staff would be leaving within the first 12 months. So again, if you are doing an annual engagement survey, and I think most NHS trusts are, then you're probably not going to hit the annual staff survey, so you might not be able to have your say or feel connected to what the results are doing or the actions that take place following that. But also, there is no systematic way of getting the feedback from the employees outside of that initiative. So for a large proportion of the people leaving, there is literally no feedback whatsoever about their experience, how it went, why they left, etc. And that causes a real issue, and obviously a massive surge in agency spend, which as we know, a lot higher than hiring normal staff and retaining the existing ones.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, we're going to break the webinar up slightly, and we're going to run the first of our quick polls. We are a feedback company, after all, and we're going to throw the question out to the audience. So we've covered 4 real examples, real cases of why customers had an issue with retention and staff acquisition. And what we'd like to ask you is how much of an issue is talent acquisition and retention in your organisation? And we've got 4 answers here. There may be others that you have, but first answer is not at all, we've nailed it. There's one which is a little bit, third an admission that we've definitely got an issue, and the 4th one is the Houston, we have a problem answer. So, Richard, what do you think this is going to come out as?
Well, I think it's a big issue for an awful lot of people, but I think probably it's an issue is going to be about where it sits. Yeah,
excellent. I think that probably safe to say, I mean, I can see the results, but Richard can't, so I could guess. We've got about 61% of the audience have voted. I'd like to get it a little bit higher. We'd like to hit around 70% just to get that. So if there's anyone just hoping to vote just in the last couple of seconds, there we go. That pushed it through. So if I just close the poll now, and we will share the results and see where that sits. And interestingly, yeah, it's an issue, sitting there nicely at about a third of the audience. Quite a lot of the audience saying it's a little bit of a problem, which is good. So it's not mission critical yet, but it's certainly something that we can look at addressing. A couple of people probably saying that, Houston, we have a problem. But interestingly, no one's saying they've nailed it. So obviously no one is saying that they've completely fixed their talent acquisition and retention programs, which is very interesting. Good for us, yep. I guess. So we're going to crack on to the next part of the webinar. Thank you for your input at that stage. Okay. Right. So, Richard.
So, I think if there were a couple of things really to highlight as to what we were trying to address really with the solution. The high staff turnover is fairly fundamental, but I think one of the things that's key to highlight here is some work from the PwC annual Global CEO Survey, which essentially states that it costs the equivalent of a year's salary to replace an employee. So that's not just the recruitment costs and all the rest of it, but the actual lost productivity, the ramp-up time, and all the other things that you would typically hope that a more experienced member of staff would contribute, as opposed to having to get somebody new to come on board and so on. So if you think that, say, in the NHS, for example, an average member of staff might earn £35,000, if you extrapolate that out into the sort of turnover that some of our people have been experiencing, that's a significant chunk of money that could be saved and could be addressed if it's simply that people didn't like their boss or whatever else it is that their feedback happens to be. So that's, I think, a key part of what we're looking at as part of this.
And I think when we look at the problem with talent acquisition and retention, obviously losing people is a big issue. But then, naturally there will be churn in any organisation, and one of the issues can be when you get new people on, making sure they're as effective as quickly as possible, and also making sure that when they do come in the door, they have the best possible experience to make sure that we've made that good first impression. And I think most organisations, would admit that if they could get staff in and as productive as possible, as quickly as possible, then that would be a good thing. So contributing to the bottom line as soon as possible is one way of putting it. So what we did is we took the experience that we've had with our customers over a number of years, and the 4 examples you had at the beginning are good, tangible examples of how this can affect businesses and the kind of business issues they were facing. And there is some commonality there. There's a common theme running through that about talent. And we took that from our core platform. We created a package solution which we called Questback Employee Touchpoint. And there were a series of key objectives that we had when we did that. We wanted to answer existing business issues. We know these are problems that most companies are facing, and I think the quick poll we just did really illustrates that. That nobody is not facing this issue in some shape or form. We wanted to build in the best practice, because what people often ask us when they come to us is, okay, we love the technology, we love what you can do, but what's the first step? How do we do it? How do we bring it to life and actually get some business results as quickly as possible? On that point, as quickly as possible, we needed to make it quick and rapid to deploy. People want to come to us, see a solution, and have it up and running, so that next month they start seeing some results. And we wanted it to be also an easy first step into our overall feedback platform. And we'll show a little bit at the end about how Employee Touchpoint fits into the overall solution framework at Questback. That can take you from doing Employee Touchpoint to actually tracking the entire employee life cycle, including engagement, leadership, etc. And more than anything, we wanted to do something that would minimize risk from our customers' points of view. Do something that was a proven technology, a proven solution, something which they knew they could get up and running as quickly as possible, and they could simply invest in and start to see results. We want, at the end of the day, to help our customers see the same results as some of the examples that we went through at the beginning. Okay, so when putting together the solution, we thought there would be two key components to it. One would be the data gathering side. We need to get more feedback from employees at these key stages in their careers with us. And the first step would be an introduction survey. This would evaluate the hiring process and the first week of employment. It would create a baseline for what happens next. It would also measure the extent, to what extent the expectations set in the hiring process have been met. So this is when the employee first comes in the door. It's like their first 35 minutes. And I think we all recognise that first impressions are really crucial. And if we're not making that massive impact when somebody joins an organisation, they walk through the front door, and it's the first 2 hours they just feel abandoned, or no one really has any idea what to do with them or where they're going, etc., then that can have a huge impact on your career moving forward. Especially seeing as you've probably still got all the contacts for your recruitment consultant and all the other companies you went to interviews with in your back pocket, fresh off the press. The next step is onboarding, and we see this as the 3 to 6 months after employment, so full onboarding into the organisation, so time to productivity really, not necessarily the onboarding training you did, which might be a week or 4 weeks, depending on what it is you do. And this would evaluate the entire process and identify potential areas of improvement. We're really looking for process improvement and experience improvement at these stages. And it would also measure the employee's likelihood to recommend the employer to family and friends, a sort of an NPS for the organisation. And finally, and you know, the least fortunate one is the exit from the organisation. And at this point, you know, we really need to uncover the reasons for leaving to understand how to better retain employees going forward. This is triggered basically as soon as you get a notification that the employee is leaving an organisation. And it ensures basically that not only do we understand why they're leaving and what their reasons are, but also the handover plan has been created to minimise business impact, and actually we've got some business continuity moving forward. Finally, the fourth component in this is the Strategic Employee Insight Map, which is the integrated dashboard. And this gives us real-time insights into what's going on. It allows you to follow changes in the employee experience over time and throughout the life cycle, so we can see if things are getting better or worse. We can identify trends and use trend data to identify early warning signs at all levels. So obviously not everything is going to help us improve a process. Some of it might help us actually interject in the middle of a process if something is starting to, you know, we see there's an early warning indicator something might be wrong. And we can set up alert thresholds and receive alerts automatically when changes occur. And what we're trying to do here is understand the reasons behind the scores as well, to go through a combination of qualitative and quantitative. So, you know, how they rate you and what they say about it in there. So open comments as well. So the other thing we've got here is, I mean, there's something here for everyone in the organisation. When we first started putting this together, there was a very obvious fit for the HR director. It's good to be able to see that we can help reduce the turnover of talented people, help, you know, retain critical talent, for instance, and that's a key you know, a key KPI, I guess, that the HR directors will be looking to improve, and the HR process owners are going to be looking to also improve the things that affect them the most, making sure that the actual people processes, so onboarding, etc., are as smooth as possible and have the best possible experience for the employees going through them. But there is also a third strand here, and this is the line manager as well. And I think there's a realization that actually in this day and age, everybody is part of the recruitment and onboarding and hiring process. And it's not something that's restricted to a few key individuals in an organization. And for that reason, I think most people want to be able to manage the risk of not being able to deliver on their target due to lacking on critical talent, etc. And they all want to see how they can actually contribute to that and improving the process overall. Okay, right, Richard, that's enough monologue from me for the time being. Let's go over to you and to the live demonstration. So,
excellent. Well, thank you very much, Luke. It's I'd like to spend a little bit of time running through our demonstration, and the demonstration is going to show a couple of key things, I hope. And once I've got the link up and ready to go, which it was all sitting there waiting happily, but of course this being a live demonstration, it's decided to move. So bear with me for 2 seconds while I get that.
They say don't play with, don't work with animals, children, and live demonstrations. And
yeah, and this is exactly the reason why.
After 15 years in software, it's still holding true, that one.
Absolutely guaranteed.
Yeah.
So while this, I promise, was up and waiting 10 minutes, 20 minutes ago, it's just taken a moment or two to come back. So
yeah, you just need to unpause your screen as well.
And let me get that sorted out.
Yeah.
There we go. So I'm hoping that everybody can now see a picture of our fearless leader. So we've made up a company called People Company to help illustrate the survey. My plan here is just to take you through 2 or 3 of the questions. So I'm not going to take you through all the surveys. I think that doesn't make sense, and will take a bit of time. So what I'd like to do is just show you this one of the surveys to give you a flavour of the sort of thing that we're doing with it. Then we'll go into the dashboard. We'll take a look through what that looks like and some of the capabilities in that for being able to drill into the information and to see some of the insight that you can get from this process. So the first part of this is just really a personalized welcome. So obviously we've got who the people are. We know quite a lot about this, and it's really key to us to make this as relevant to the individual as possible. So we would typically refer to job roles, to a wide range of other things, to make this as personal and relevant as we can. So at any stage then, we can then just continue and go on into the survey. We thought long and hard about the right approach for this, and actually for somebody who's starting a new role, there's more appetite to actually answer some of the questions in a bit more depth. So we're moving away from a typical satisfaction type survey, and the reason for that is that a satisfaction survey might be 3 questions, and I don't think that you're going to get the level of insight that you're looking for, and that's actually going to make a difference to your business by doing that. So we just have taken a very straightforward approach using a few matrix questions. We will obviously, that's obviously open to change, so should you so wish, we can use whichever question types you like. But these are the standard questions that we've selected as we go through. One of the other things we've done is add in some free text, some open text boxes for people to respond. And to help minimize the cost, we've kept this to be self-categorizing. So rather than including large chunks of things like text analytics and so on, we've made sure that what we're doing is making sure that people can select what the topic is that they feel is most relevant to the comment that they're making. And that way we're still getting good depth of data, we've still got some trends and so on as we go through. You'll notice we're also highlighting specific areas as we go through this. So performing the best you can, I know what's expected of me and how my work contributes to the company, the necessary skills, positive contributions and so on. So the questions and the wording, I guess, in the end of it, what we're not saying is that this is the gospel. What we are saying is that from our experience, these are good questions. As part of any implementation, obviously the less you change, the faster it is. But if you decide that you then want to move ahead and make a few changes that are more reflective of your business, then that's a very straightforward and easy thing for us to do. But as I say, it might just take a small amount of additional time. So I'll finish going through some of these questions here just to give you a flavour of the style and the length of the survey. And again, we haven't gone with anything particularly outrageous in terms of the look and feel. We've kept it nice and easy for people. Easy. Now, why didn't I say survey? That is spelled right. Again, just selecting those topics. So we've kept the open text to a relatively limited number. So I think it's about 3 in this particular survey. And again, covering off details such as strategy, values, and so forth. So no great surprise, you know, in that this is a survey, I think a reasonably nice one. We've also added in a recommendation, an EMPS question. I'll add in some more text here. And it then gives you the ability to move on. And that's the end of that. So it's not a massive survey. It's going to take somebody maybe 5 to 10 minutes with some rather more considered responses than the ones that I've just given. And the other 2 surveys follow a very similar track. So they're much the same in terms of the style, look and feel. But obviously the questions and so on are slightly different as we go through. So if I move across and give you a quick look now at the Employee Touchpoint dashboard, I'll just start that up. And we've got a range of different things here for you to look at. So I'll just give you a quick tour around the screen to begin with, and then you'll get an idea of what this is all about.
And before we dive into that, just a quick reminder, if you do have any questions, then please feel free to pop them into the questions. We've already got a few coming through, but we'll be able to handle those at the end. We'll make some time for it.
Yeah, okay.
And don't do as one person has just done, which is accidentally type their password into the question dialog. You assume that's what they've written. But yeah, we'd welcome your questions, and to make it interactive towards the end, that'd be fantastic.
Awesome. So across the top, you can see a sort of toolbar. So each one of these points to a different dashboard. So you've got entry, onboarding, exit as the drill down dashboards, if you like, below that. The one I'm on is the employee touchpoint, which is the main dashboard, which is a roll up of the other data and giving you an idea of exactly where you stand on what we base this on a 5-point scale. So this would be 3.3 out of 5, for example, and you can see the exit down there as being out of 2.9. We also have some open answers and a heat map, and you'll see as part of our standard My Site dashboards, the ability to do exports of this data. And again, we can restrict this so that that button is either there or not there. So that's a very straightforward thing for us to do. So as we come down a section, you'll then see a range of filters. And what I'll do on that is just as we go through the filters, you'll see some of the options that are available. So the first part, here we come. It's very easy to look back and compare the data. So you can see that if I go back down to, say, 3 months instead of the last 4 months, which is what the standard pointer was, then you'll see all the data changes, the employee score changes, and so on. I can also filter based on organization. So I've just got standard functional areas here. But if I take away 2 or 3 of these, then you'll notice that things like the EMPS score and so on will change and have some chunky effect. So the exit score total, for example, went down quite significantly. And once you see what those functional areas are, it allows you then drill in based on maybe role or geography, just using simple filters. So we haven't even touched drilling in via the dashboard on specific areas of the dashboard at this stage. And I think that's quite important to be able to get access to as much of the data using as few clicks as possible. So a lot of attention has gone into this and making this as effective as we can, using just standard filters that aren't going to get in the way, basically, of a standard business user accessing the system. As we then come down, you can start to see a few other things. So we've got some positive trends and negative trends. These are based on, over the period of time, over the last 3 months, the change over that period of time. So it's a percentage change that we've obviously done something quite significant in the application process. We're doing something much, much better at that particular point, for example. You'll also see as you go down the entry, onboarding, and exit setups down there. And you can see how they are trending down and up, and it allows us to then drill into those as we go. So what I'm going to do now is click through to the entry dashboard, and what that shows us is much more detailed information that we've managed to glean from the survey. So because it's a relatively detailed survey, and we're not talking 100 questions here, it's more like 20. But what it does give us is a lot more information about things like that recruitment process, about that first week's experience. It also allows you to see, based on the Net Promoter Score, whether they're detractors or promoters and what their score is. You can still use exactly the same filters as you had previously. And again, if I go into my organization, for example, and I drill into those particular functional areas and change that filter, then you'll notice that the employee Net Promoter Score here actually goes up. So, these are 2 better areas for this particular part of the process. You'll also see that we've got some icons showing you the trend going up or down for that time period. So whatever we've selected up here, it will be reflected down here. And all of this is just about giving you as much information as possible in as small a space as possible, without being massively over the top. So it's not a cluttered space, and it makes it easy for you to drill in and take a good look at what's going on within the dashboard. So what I'm going to do now is click through onto the onboarding side of things. And on the onboarding side, this is the survey that we've just been through, so you'll see that pop up in just a second, with the details around things like understanding of company strategy and values and performing the best you can and so on. So there are some slightly different areas within this, and it will allow you to then select different sections and drill into those to understand more about what's going on. You can also see the scale on here, so it's obvious to you what the data is behind it. And throughout this, we've also highlighted as much as possible easy filters such as gender and the constant trend for the Net Promoter Score for this particular area across this section. The other nice part of this for me is the topics with most comments. So again, we've kept the cost down, as I've mentioned, with the text analytics not being part of this solution out of the box. But what we're still able to do is at least tell you the areas with the most comments and the things that have been coming back and what people are talking about within that area, which they've self-categorized, which I think is a very useful part of what we're doing here. You also see the look and feel has stayed much the same throughout. We've tried to keep that looking very similar. And the exit survey, again, the survey itself is different, therefore the dashboard data is different. So the key things are things like, could we have done anything to make you want to stay with us? Is there a handover plan for your responsibilities and so on? And again, once you start changing and making changes to the filters and the selections here, then that data will all shift, and you can see that there's a lot more people saying no at that point, and hence the lower Net Promoter Score and so on, as we add those areas of the organization back in that were rather more negative than positive. There are two other pieces of this dashboard which I'd just like to run through briefly before I hand back to Luke and the final part of the presentation. The open answers area, I think, gives a lot of value, and my apologies for all the Latin, but we couldn't actually put real stuff in here. So,
although there's always something for everyone dialing in from the Vatican.
There really is, yes.
There really is. We can keep it open for everyone.
So, yes, diversity is the name, is the watchword. So, within that, you can then start drilling into the question scores. You can start to look at specific areas that you want to deal with. And as you drill in, you can start to see where some comments are relevant to that specific area that you're looking for. So again, it's all about understanding that. It's about understanding the question trends that fit around it. And then, because these are all related to comments that are active, that are related to specific questions, if I put my teeth back in, on the right-hand side, some people will not have actually selected that it's about a specific area. So this is where you've got those other comments relating to those sections. And again, obviously that all filters based on the date and so on that we've selected as we go, or on the geographic area. And again, we've kept the regions completely bland and so on, so that it's at least everybody can understand where we're coming from with it.
Yeah. We do have one question from the audience, because this has come out actually in a couple of questions about the text analytics. So how easy would it be to integrate if required? And the answer to that is it can be integrated pretty easily. So we actually have a built-in trigger in our platform where we can call a text analytics and do the coding automatically. So you can do the sentiment analysis on that, and you can then do the coding. And I think, as Richard said, when we go back to the original goals for the solution, we wanted to try to make this as sort of easy to approach as possible. And part of that is obviously the cost element to it. So doing the transcription of the verbatim is one thing, but then subscribing some kind of meaning to that, you do need to do some pretty good text analytics. And what we found in testing and from just customer experience is that it takes the respondent seconds to choose what category, but which would obviously be absolutely fine in text analytics, but it takes seconds. It's not a major inconvenience. And then for customers who then want to go beyond and subscribe to Questback as a platform, and do more things, then text analytics become more and more relevant. And I think for that, it's incredibly easy to just to plug that into text analytics at that point.
Quite agree, and we're doing it for a number of different people, so it's just a question of finding what fits for you as a solution, I would suggest. So I think the answer is it's very straightforward to add text analytics to this. I just wanted to make it obvious what's included as part of this package. So the dashboards, the access to the dashboards and all the rest of it, that's all a fundamental part of what we're offering here. And the final part is around the heat map, which allows you to just drill in by individual process areas. I really like this area because it allows you to start adding more filters. It also allows you to drill by role, function, geography very easily, and also by score. So this has always interested me, the way that you can shift the scores around and really focus on a specific area very easily. So just by moving that dial, it allows you to focus on, maybe we know that the people that are really upset and the people that are really happy, but let's take a look at the people in the middle ground and try and get a bit more information about the areas where we're performing better or maybe not so well. And again, the focus here is on the onboarding part of the process. If we go back to the entry, the dashboard reconfigures, it retains the score filter that I've put into that while it goes off and gets that data, and again allows you to do those comparisons. And you can see from the entry data that it's much more positive, generally speaking anyway, throughout that area of data, as you might imagine, and as you might also imagine, rather more negative as you come through the exit part of this, and see that part of the process as we go.
And a key design principle here was to try to make it as easy as possible to find actionable insight, to find something that we can actually do something about. So by comparing in this heat map across the different functions, we can see the areas where we've potentially got issues within the organisation and see where we should maybe focus efforts. If that correlates to some of the hard data that we're getting about attrition in the workforce, then obviously there's this allows us to drill down a little bit further and see what it might be precisely that's starting to affect that.
Yeah, quite agree. So I'm just going to move back to the presentation for you guys, and obviously any questions or anything you'd like us to go through in more detail, then just add that into the chat. But for now, I'll hand back to Luke and another quick poll.
Excellent. So quick polls are my favourite. So we're going to thank you very much, Richard, for the demo. We do have quite a few questions actually. So before we go into the quick poll, let's just very quickly handle some of those questions. If I can actually find the questions box again. So yeah, one of the questions come in saying, can the dashboard views actually be restricted for certain users? So we want HR to see everything, for instance, but there's a line of business manager would only see the people or the area under him. And the answer to that is obviously yes.
Very much so. So one of the core parts of what we do is allowing us to manage the organizational hierarchy. And from that hierarchy, it's very easy for us to push across the relevant access points to the right people. So just by knowing where somebody sits in the organization, we can ensure that the right people get the right data. So that's not an issue at all.
Yeah. Another question has come in. So can the dashboard be branded to my company? The answer there is absolutely. The dashboard can be branded to your company, and included in the delivery for Employee Touchpoint is the color scheme and the logo, which is just natural. You'd want that to appear. If your competitor was all blue, so if you were, I don't know, Manchester United, you wouldn't want everything to be blue in your dashboard, I guess. So yes, you can change the color scheme, change the logo, and that all is standard. And then one of the other questions was, how easy is it to change the questions in the survey, for instance, over time, adapt them as the business is evolving? And yeah, Richard.
So it's something within the tool. It's extremely straightforward. So just changing a question like that is fine. I think where you'd want to take advice is if you've been running it for a long time. Obviously, there's trend data to consider and those sort of things. But just making the change in itself is a very simple thing for us to do, and is part of I think probably the way we'd want to do that is make it just a part of moves and changes, the sort of standard approach. to make sure that you're happy with the package that you've purchased. So yeah, nice simple stuff for us to achieve, but let's make sure they're the right changes at the right time.
Yeah, excellent. I think that's a good summary of the questions now. I think a few of those are duplicates, so hopefully that answered everyone's questions, but if not, then by all means fire away and send us that again. So right, we're just going to go into the next quick poll then. So actually, no, we're a bit early for this one. Sorry. We actually need to go back and I can't actually do it again, which is a bit of a shame. Right, Richard, if you just like to go to the next slide, I think that one's slightly in the wrong place.
Okay. Apologies. I'm sure that's my fault.
It's entirely my fault. For anyone listening, that was completely my issue there. Right. So the next thing really to talk about, one of the main goals for Employee Touchpoint was that this served as a good introduction to our feedback platform as a whole. What we see with the years of experience we've got helping with employee insight and customer insight as well, this is entirely relevant to that too, is that there are 4 basic feedback approaches, and they are absolutely fundamental to driving true engagement. So at the beginning we asked this question when looking at the 4 customer cases, how could you deal with this, or how could you help this with a traditional feedback approach? Really, when we're looking at Employee Touchpoint, we're absolutely touching on this process-based feedback. It's feedback that gets injected in or fired off at specific points in the employee life cycle. So when I join the organization, when I leave the organization, etc. What we've got from then is you get the on-demand feedback, which is managers may be asking feedback after a meeting or kicking off a leadership 360 or something like that. Always on, where employees are giving feedback at any stage. So just, when they come in the morning, they feel like giving feedback, and maybe they've got the opportunity to go to a site where they can tell you what they think. Finally, and we get to the finally, scheduled, which is actually the traditional feedback approach that most organizations take with the big annual employee survey, or even with some pulses that they might do throughout the year. And the important thing is actually that it's a combination of all of these elements that actually helps you to drive true engagement. If we think back to some of the issues we had with contact center staff leaving after an average of 15 months, actually, if we're not getting feedback when they join the organization or go through onboarding or leave, we can't find out why. But also, maybe the annual survey isn't very convenient for them to fill in the job that they do. So we need to give them the ability to give feedback at other points during the day, maybe with always on. So Richard, if you can. Yep. Okay. So what we see when we apply this to employee insight is that we need to actually cover the whole of the employee life cycle and the employee journey throughout the organization. And what we do with Employee Touchpoint, which you've just seen, is attack those 3 process-driven bullets there. But there is also this in-life engagement, which we have with alignment, engagement, and leadership, which is very important to keep an eye on as well, using a combination of all of the 4 feedback methods above. And then finally, turning this into actionable insight. And as you saw in all of the dashboards and the results that Richard showed you, actually the really important thing is to be able to see that real time and live. So there's no point waiting 3 months or even 3 weeks for a report to hit your desk, especially if you've got 20,000 staff and your turnover is as high that basically every 15 months, or the average tenure is about 15 months. If you boil that down, that means that on any given day you might be losing between 40 and 50 people. And so you've probably got an intake of new staff every single week of maybe 250 people coming into the organization, going through a variety of academies, onboarding programs, etc. And there's a real genuine impact that can be had from getting feedback straight away, seeing where you might have problem areas, and actually acting on it so that next week you don't just repeat the same problems that you had the previous week. So making actionable insight that you can really do something about and make the organization better and retain that key talent is what we're trying to aim at. And what we wanted with Employee Touchpoint was to make a nice, easy entry into this world of employee insight. Customers often tell us actually that the whole thing sounds great, but where do I start? What point do I, which part do I get first, and all these sorts of things. And actually, with Employee Touchpoint, we've made it very, very easy to start the first step on that journey, and then the next step is far simpler still.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. One of the biggest issues that we see coming from customers is where they say that their data is siloed. So they've got people using free systems because there's such a demand for and appetite for feedback throughout the system. There's the always-on aspect, which some businesses just aren't ready for, in all honesty. And there's a certain culture and approach that is really important to be able to manage that and make that work. But again, if you do implement something like that, then often it's not on the same platform as your scheduled approach or your on-demand approach or the process-based, if you've got that far. And I think the other point to add into this is that when you are using a platform, that process-based aspect is quite key, really, because if you can automate this and make it as pain-free as humanly possible, then it's far more likely to be used on a regular basis. It also means there's going to be less mistakes. It's going to have people included in that process automatically, and it just becomes standard business as usual. And that's what we believe. That's why we believe you need those 4 feedback approaches, and it's also why we believe the platform is so powerful, because it allows you to take any one of those at any stage that you wish, including the scheduled. But if the platform is yours, it still allows you to bring in other people to do that on your behalf, should you so wish. So by all means, come and run it for me, but use my platform to do that. And we've got a number of people taking that approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And the analogy I always use is one of flying a plane. If you fly enough, you might buy a private jet, but you probably need a pilot's license before you start flying it yourself, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So right, and now we can run the survey, the quick poll that I was going to run before, but obviously I put it in exactly the wrong place. So here we go. So after that part, so we're actually really genuinely interested in this. So which of the feedback approaches do you use in your organisation? And the first is process-based. Covered that quite accurately, I think, during the employee touchpoint. So these are the feedback mechanisms where it's injected automatically at certain points in time based on something that happens in the organisation, like an employee leaving or starting. On demand, where managers might be going in and kicking off initiatives like a 360 leadership assessment. Always on, where anyone can give feedback all the time. And scheduled, which is I think the traditional employee annual survey. So Richard, again, I can see the results coming in as they come in. You can't see them.
I would think that scheduled would almost certainly be well up there, but I think it's you could select multiples of those. So I'd be surprised if there are lots of people doing always on, but probably quite a few on demand if on an ad hoc basis. So yeah, I'd be fascinated to see what the scores, the results are.
Yeah, and I can see them coming in live, and I didn't anticipate that. I mean, we'll wait till it gets to 70, so we need a few more people to answer yet. So if you're just hovering over the selection boxes or just shouting at a colleague in the background to get an answer from them or something, or you were thinking of answering, you're a long-time listener, first-time voter, then by all means, click the button. Otherwise, I'll close the poll in a couple of seconds. And yes, that's pushed a couple more over the line. Fantastic. Thank you very much. See, it's just a matter of asking sometimes. Right, so we're going to close the survey there, and I'll share the results. And I mean, as expected, a lot of people have gone for scheduled. Interestingly, I could see that actually going up in real time. So someone, I think, ticked it and then unticked it. So scheduled is the top score. 79% of the audience are running scheduled surveys. The process-based actually coming in quite high, I thought.
And I think people are probably running exit surveys, almost certainly. But maybe it's probably via a separate system or a separate silo and so on. So yeah, great to see it happening there.
Fantastic. And on demand and always on. Always on, I think, as low as I expected it to be, and on demand as well. I mean, we are seeing this rise of being able to giving managers and leaders the power of getting feedback from employees whenever they want, and that's certainly going to be the topic of a future webinar very soon. Okay, right, let's pull it back from the survey results. Thank you again very much for your participation on that one. Okay, so making it coming back to full circle to the very beginning when we looked at those customer cases. So the one example I'd like to really highlight is Northern Devon Healthcare NHS Trust, which is a real mouthful, and when we were practicing the webinar, I got it wrong every time I said it. They have actually, by implementing a program focused on their employees, using Questback to get feedback at particular touch points in an employee life cycle, they've actually that's helped to reduce agency costs by 42%, and this is through increased staff retention and a number of other things, saving about £5 million per year. And one of the questions I had while we were preparing the webinar is that by putting in employee touchpoint? And the answer to that question is no, it's not. Employee touchpoint is actually something that's been born as a result of having customers like this doing these initiatives. And what we want to do is, these savings are absolutely staggering. That £5 million from an NHS trust can be money that could be much better spent elsewhere, actually caring for people. So you could actually equate that 5 million to how many lives were saved by improving staff retention. And so it's a really key thing to be able to do that. And we know there are lots of other organisations that want to be able to do similar things than this, but just can't take that step because of the barriers to it. And so when we put together Employee Touchpoint, this is what we had in mind. We wanted to boil that down to something that would be usable for as many people as possible. And that's, I think, what we've achieved. So I think we're pretty proud of that.
Yeah, very much.
And we also have, we wanted to end on a quote, actually, from Darren Alcorn, who's the Director of Workforce and Development at the Trust, who says that Questback has helped our retention rates increase and turnover decrease. Sickness and really crucially absence rates have improved. So that would help with just the workforce consistency as well, being able to make sure that you're able to provide a consistent level of care throughout the trust. And staff feel happy and good in their work, and I think we all know how important that is. If you don't feel happy and good in your work, I think that has a rub-on effect on everyone around you, including your patients. So I think this is a really great summing up of why this is so important to do. I'm just going to have a quick look at the questions just to make sure that there's nothing there. We've had that question again, actually, so just to reiterate, yes, we definitely can restrict dashboards for certain users. So certain users can see certain things and others not. And there's one other question, I'm just trying to get to it. No, and I think that's it. No more questions. So Richard.
Well, I'd just like to reiterate that for us, this has been something that we know there's an issue out there. We know that people feel that there's a barrier to entry to do this sort of thing. But we've tried to make it as low risk as possible for anyone to just take that step. It's quite a low barrier of entry. And even if it's done on a departmental level or for a specific section of the business rather than the whole thing, you're going to add value. And I think that we've proved throughout a number of different customer cases that this will add value. And it's just a question of rolling it out as a package rather than doing it as a separate project each time.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Richard. Right. Well, I think we're about to hit the hour, so we won't take any more of your time, but thank you very much for both your attendance and your participation in the quick poll. It's always fun to see what the audience is thinking. And thank you for the questions that you put through it. That helps to make it nice and interactive. So we hope to hear from you all soon. And in the meantime, it's goodbye from Richard.
Goodbye.
And it's goodbye from me. Thank you very much.